Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Thriving with Rachael and Dr. Lou. Last week we were kind of ending on the idea of talking about boundaries, and so we talked this week about bringing that back up again and kind of expanding a little bit on that topic. And you know, a lot of times when people ask about boundaries, they tend to focus on setting it for the other person, like telling you
Don't do
what
this.
you shouldn't be doing,
Right.
because that's my boundary. That's really not boundaries in my view. Boundaries are for you. They're for me to set. And it's kind of like a fence around your yard. It's to keep others out, or to keep, animals out of my yard, so to speak. And so the boundary is for my protection and my space. And so the ground rules, if you will, have to be about what do you want and how are you creating that environment or that boundary, as opposed to telling somebody else they can't come in. I often give the example of, when somebody knocks on your door, you choose whether you let them in or not. The boundary is you opening the door or leaving it shut. And I think oftentimes people are trying to tell people, stop knocking at my door, stop coming to my door.
I think that's an issue, though, with the expectations around boundaries, or how people have been known to set boundaries is to tell you what not to do.
Yeah.
Try telling a kid to stop running in the house. They might for a minute, but if you don't give them something else to occupy them, they're going to start running around the house again, right? And that's the same thing with us. I mean, we're adults at this point maybe, but it's
most of the time.
But it's the same kind of reinforcement for any of us. If we're being told not to do something, or even tell ourselves, like, don't eat that cake, I'm going to be thinking about it. I'm not going to, if I don't have anything else to occupy my mind, it's going to create more tension, I guess, within myself. So it's important to look at boundaries as not necessarily telling somebody what not to do, but expressing the experience that we have first and identifying what the preference would be. Do you find often that boundaries you set are saying what not? Like, do you fall into that category?
Well, I've learned over the years, because of my whole focus on, the more you say don't think of this, the more you do.
Right.
So I've often tried to, instead of focusing on what not to do, try to identify what do I want.
Right.
As opposed to what I don't want to do, what do I want? So I've learned over the years to kind of refocus my attention and my thought process on that. But I know a lot of times that's what people struggle with, is trying to stop something from happening, as opposed to focusing on, where they want to go, what do they want to have happen.
Well, because I think we're very aware of what we don't want. It's what causes discomfort.
Yeah.
So we automatically think, if I don't have this in my life, then things will be better. Which makes sense in theory, but it's not how we can execute change, right? We need to identify what we prefer so we can actually implement it. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about structuring boundaries, which in the beginning might sound pretty structural and like a robotic sense sometimes, but it's just good to have a basic structure, I think, to boundaries. So a couple tips that I want you guys to really think of when you're going to set a boundary is making sure that you're using I statements. A lot of times when we're uncomfortable with someone, or we're not a fan of what they're doing, we tend to say, you make me feel this way. You do this and it makes me feel this way. If I said, you're doing this, what would your response be?
No, I'm not.
What?
Or, so.
Right, like, or I'm so sorry. Like, it's just, the response you get isn't change. The response you get is a rebuttal or something happening, right? Not anything I'm doing to change. So being able to say, I feel X, Y, and Z ways is important. Identifying the actual feeling is important. So I feel dismissed, or I feel unheard, or whatever it might be. When, and then you can express what the actual action might be. So I feel dismissed when you walk away in the middle of our conversations, or when we separate our conversations without clarifying what we want, or whatever it might be. Second thing is expressing what you want. In the future, it would be more helpful if we continued our conversations, or set a time to maybe revisit them, so we weren't just ending the conversation. That way the person actually knows what they're supposed to be doing. They have a goal in mind, right?
Do you invite people in with those ideas? Like, in the future, it would be nice if we could kind of decide on what the game plan is before we, stop talking, right? Would you throw it out there, like, if you would feel okay with this, or if it would be okay with you, I would prefer us do this?
It depends on the person that you're talking to. I might encourage you to keep the context of in the future it would be helpful if, because to your point, it's about me and what my needs are. But at the same time, it's between two people. So there needs to somewhat be buy-in from the other person. Not always, and that's another day to talk about, but to kind of make sure it actually gets executed, right? So I might say in the future it'd be more helpful if instead of yelling, we took a break and then we revisited this. What are your thoughts? As opposed to, would you mind if, because then it gives them the option to say no.
Yeah.
That's not really what I'm asking. I'm not asking for a yes or no. I'm asking how would this work? This is what I need. How would this work? So sort of, to answer your question.
So in many ways, you're suggesting the person own it.
That's right.
Right? So if you're owning it, then you're kind of setting up the parameters or the boundaries. And then it's up to the other person whether they buy in or not, because then that creates a decision point for you.
Right. Which is why the second part of boundaries is also really important. You can put something out there of what you prefer, and there's a very good chance that somebody might not respect it, right? It might be violated. Remember, to your point, the point of a boundary is to make sure that you are feeling safe. And the way that we do that is by reinforcing consequences, which gets a bad rap. When I say consequences, I don't mean rules or, something bad is going to happen, but, what's the outcome going to be? So one thing I would recommend is making sure that the first consequence that you put in place is an outcome-based consequence, something that naturally will happen. If my boundary of us walking away without arguing can't be respected, our relationship will continue to suffer. Just a natural thing. It's probably already happening. A natural thing I'm pointing out, outcome-based consequence, just something that's happening that will probably affect both of us, right? It's to kind of add some meat to what's going to happen and make it real for everyone. If that's continually reinforced and then continually violated, the next kind of level of a consequence that you might want to put in place is more of an action-based consequence. So that can sound like, if my boundary can't be respected, I'm not going to be able to talk to you about this topic anymore. Or we're no longer going to be able to talk over the phone, whatever it might be.
Play on words in some ways. Would you point out that I'm not going to be willing to talk to you over the phone, or continue to have a conversation, or continue to engage in a relationship with you?
Yeah. What will happen? It's something that I'm purposely going to do versus an outcome-based consequence, which is something that will naturally take place without any change necessarily. So if things aren't to change, this is what will happen.
Now, one of the things that I would question about is, what if the person, this is their idea of what the boundary should be.
The person setting it?
Yeah. So I want to be able to say, I'm not going to continue having these kinds of discussions if this is the result, or this is the behavior, or whatever. However, what if I have a hard time
holding to it? Well, then I hope that makes sense then why behaviors continue to happen. That sounds really simple, but that's why things happen over and over again. Why anybody repeats a behavior is because it's reinforced in some way. Bottom line. For instance, if I continue to not going to the gym, maybe continues to make me feel bad about myself. So you'd say, well, why do I keep not going to the gym? It's clearly not being reinforced. Except every time I don't go to the gym, I don't have to get out of bed at 6 a.m. So you got to seek for it. A kid's acting up in a classroom, and you put them in the hallway every time that they are acting up. Well, why do they keep repeating it? Well, being in the hallway might be reinforcing. Why would it be reinforcing? Because they get to just color and hang out and not have to listen. Why wouldn't a kid want to act up to get put in the hallway, right? So we have to look at what's reinforcing the behavior. Anything that repeats itself is being reinforced in some capacity, and we have to just kind of look for what it is. And it might be me. Again, it's not wrong. It's just, this is why.
Yeah.
Right?
Which is helpful, right? It gives us a direction. How do you get to that place of being stronger in the sense of being able to hold those boundaries?
Well, I describe to my clients a lot of times that change is a backwards process. So you first identify what you want to have changed, and then you're going to keep doing the old thing at first. And you might make a change.
That's normal.
That's normal.
Natural.
Yeah. And you might implement the change after you normally would have. So maybe I engage in the yelling, and then afterwards I come back and say, man, we yelled again, and that wasn't my intention. And you just kind of tell the person, just kind of put it out there, this is what I would have preferred to do. Then maybe...
So the goal there is to kind of catch yourself sooner.
Even if it's after.
So it could happen because it's going to happen.
It will.
It's kind of predictable.
It is.
But if I can catch myself within 10 minutes of it happening,
even the next day,
or the next
like
day,
it's after. I just kind of put a quote up after the event takes place, or after the habit takes place.
so it
do
has
you
to be
notice it?
acknowledged.
Yes, it has to. You have to be aware at some point,
Okay.
which most of us are
Mhm.
after it happens. And then to your point, sooner and sooner.
Mhm.
Sooner before that, which is why it's a backwards process, is I might notice while I'm yelling. Like we're in the middle of the argument. Wait a minute, we said we weren't going to do this.
Mhm.
This was not the plan. The plan was we were going to walk away. Let's revisit in 5 minutes. Whatever. Then maybe the next time you feel yourself starting to boil.
Yeah.
And that's when, you walk away. It's not linear either.
Mhm.
Something that's going to happen and be fluid back and forth with
Because
ebbs
it
and
depends on the
flows.
situation. Some
It depends.
I can predict. Some will just spontaneously happen, and then all of a
Some
sudden
might happen
trigger.
when I don't feel good. Some
Yeah.
might happen when I've already had a stressful day. Some might happen right when I wake up.
Mhm.
Plenty of reasons as to why it's not going to be perfect. I guess one thing you have to remember, though, sort of what we touched on last week, is make sure you're identifying what you want. Just because you don't reinforce a boundary that you put into place doesn't mean that you don't want it anymore.
Mhm.
It just means it's a pretty ingrained habit.
Mhm.
And it's something I'm trying to change. I will tell you, if the person you're setting the boundary with is not trying to help you reinforce it, it will be a lot harder. So checking in with yourself frequently about the boundary you're trying to set, making sure you're visualizing it kind of before the day even gets started is really important. Revisiting it, making sure it's on the forefront of your mind is crucial, because if we're not, it's
Yeah.
10 years later and we're still thinking the same
Yeah.
thing.
So it would be helpful to have somebody outside hold us accountable in some way.
Somebody who is supportive.
Somebody who is supporting.
Yeah.
Whether that's a friend, a therapist, a life coach, a neighbor, gym buddy,
Yeah.
whatever. But I think when we say it out loud to somebody else, it takes on a different life.
Mm-hmm.
If we just talk about it in our head, it's so easy to just
Yeah.
let that go.
Takes on meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it makes it more concrete, for sure. And then you don't feel so alone in it. Every time I go, not every time, but a lot of times when I'm making a decision, I question it frequently, randomly, until it happens.
Yeah.
If you talk about it with someone else, it makes it less intimidating,
Mhm.
It makes it more real and validating, I think. So yeah, absolutely. Holding yourself accountable, for sure. So a couple things that I want to make sure we are taking from today is remembering the function of a boundary. The function of a boundary is to protect yourself and for you to feel safe and for you to feel heard, even if the other person doesn't hear you, right? For you to be able to get your point across, if you will. And to remember the components of a boundary. One, expressing your needs through I statements, I need or I feel X, Y, and Z. Telling the person what it is you need in an action-based way, a very concrete way, not vague, right? Make sure it's specific, and make sure that you're adding a consequence, whether it's outcome-based if it's first time you're setting this boundary, or action-based if it's something that needs a little bit more reinforcement. And then maybe even having an accountability buddy to hold you accountable for the change that you're looking for, to make sure you're not letting yourself off the hook and continuing down a path of reinforcing a habit that you don't want.
Sounds like a good plan.
See you
All
guys
right,
next
good
week.
luck.